Hello and welcome to Xtalks Spotlight, illuminating insights from subject matter experts and industry thought leaders. I'm Sonia Hunt. In this episode, we're asking the question, how can a central lab deliver essential lab data and optimize study timelines? With more, here is Aisha Rashid.
Thank you, Sonia. For any clinical trial, accurate, reliable, and efficient data play a crucial role. Real-time access to clean data can help the clinical trial sponsor make more informed decisions and can drive higher operational efficiencies. Yet sponsors face difficulties in consistently obtaining accurate data from their central laboratory partner. It is essential for a CRO central lab to offer strategic tools and systems that effectively manage all aspects of clinical trials. This includes providing integrated data to project teams in real time, enabling informed decision-making and driving site excellence, particularly for complex trials. It involves anticipating and addressing challenges that keep clients up at night and providing solutions based on user feedback. Additionally, robust IT capabilities are imperative to foster continuous innovation and embrace the latest challenges. In this Spotlight feature, we are delighted to speak with Chris Clendening, Senior Vice President, Global Laboratory Services, CentralLab at PPD, which is a part of Thermo Fisher Scientific, to learn more about how PPD has recognized the importance of a clinical focus and has reimagined the role of the central lab in the clinical trial ecosystem. Preclarus Lab Solutions is a cutting-edge platform designed to tackle the many challenges faced by drug developers in today's data-driven landscape. It includes a proprietary web-based enterprise and information management system for the central lab, and it provides a fast and accurate study startup. Thank you for taking the time for this Spotlight interview, Chris.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Aisha.
All right, to start off with, I'd like to ask, what are some of the challenges drug developers face regarding obtaining the lab data that they need?
I think that getting the data from the central lab environment, really labs have been focused on generating result data, patient data, which is what they should be focused on, no question. That's paramount in the whole ecosystem of clinical trials. But that being said, there's a whole host of operational data that goes along with that. When you look at a clinical trial and how that works, just from a central lab environment, you're thinking about you're getting a database set up, you're getting kits that are going out to sites. Those kits are then being utilized. The utilized kits then translate into samples. There's a tracking of those samples when all those samples have to come back to the lab, those hit the lab's doorstep, those are analyzed, and then those results are reported out. So until about 10 years ago, when we started working on this, everything was focused about getting that lab result out. And that's been, again, paramount for the central lab industry. But all of this operational data that is out there has really been a challenge to get to for our clients and for CROs, and how do we surface that? So I think that that's probably the hardest part for a lot of our clients, is being able to visualize what's going on within their study in real time. So being able to have a system that shows you every step of the process in real time and how that is, tracking from sample chain of custody, the queries that are outstanding, kits and supplies, all of those types of pieces has kind of been a black box until you develop tools that actually allow for that. And so, and then the last thing I think is that for clients, that one of the hardest things is they're evolving the way that their clinical trials progress, and they're evolving the way, a study is designed. And so as a central lab, you have to be flexible enough to be able to meet all of the needs of all of those evolving types of protocols. You're going to have oncology or CV studies or vaccines types of studies. They all work differently, and you have to be able to flex to be able to meet the needs of all of those and surface that same data.
And speaking about PPD's Central Lab Services, how does the company's Central Lab assist clients?
Probably about 12, 13 years ago, PPD Global Central Labs made a fundamental decision to take a bit of a different path. So we're completely focused on generating results and having that information go back to our physicians and our sites and allowing them to make clinical decisions for their patients. But we also recognized that all of this day-to-day tactical operations data was lacking. So we started to go down the path of really starting to innovate. What was lacking in the industry? So we actually stepped back and we did a comparison. We said, what are people using in their day-to-day lives that would be applicable in the central lab industry? And so we put together this whole innovative team to really start focusing on what tools are we going to provide both to our clients and to our sites and be able to get it right the first time. And it's paramount to have the right tools to do the job. So with all of the complexity, all of the things that are happening in a clinical trial and being able to surface that data, you really do need to have more than just testing. You've got to have the ecosystem that's built around that and then surface all of that data so that you can get that increased speed and efficiency.
And specifically, why did PPD create Preclarus? And could you tell us a bit more about the platform?
So Preclarus, in its original inception, and I use that term because it has grown a lot over the past decade, but the original focus when this project was launched was really about solving those industry problems that we've just talked about, right? What are the pieces other than lab testing that we're trying to solve for? And probably one of the biggest ones that we needed to solve for was that we wanted to have a single global database. And the reason that you want to have a single global database is that way you're not, trials work across the globe. So you've got trials that are running in the US and the EU and APAC, and they kind of make their way around the globe. They all have the same way of working. They all have the same problems, but you need to have visibility to all of them simultaneously. So we created that single global database to provide that visibility so that you could actually see what's happening within your study all at one time. Now, subsequent to that, though, the other benefit of having a single global database is that when you're setting up a study and you're programming that, you only need to program it one time. So you're not trying to merge databases around the world. You've got one database that you're logging into, you're programming that database, all of that is surfaced, and it's ready to go all in one fell swoop. So your speed to set up is much faster. Then what we started to look at was probably one of the bigger problems in the industry was the sample chain of custody. And by that, I mean the complete chain of custody. So you can imagine if you had a patient that came in, they sat down, I'm taking a sample from them, whether it's blood or saliva, whatever that sample is. And now I've got that sample in my hand. How do I track that sample from the point at which it was collected all the way through its entire life cycle? So how does it get from what airway bill, courier did it get onto? How did it get to the lab? And as we've progressed over the last decade, there are more and more specialty labs. So not only do you have to worry about that sample chain of custody when it comes into a central lab environment, but now you have to worry about that sample that could go anywhere in the world, including non-central labs. So you want to be able to track that chain of custody all the way through. The next thing that we started to focus on with that sample chain of custody in having that collection of that sample is that in the real world, people make errors, right? That's just the way it is. I mean, you're going to have error rates. People make mistakes, and that's okay. But we wanted to look at that and say, well, how can we help people not make those errors? So how can we help them not make that mistake at the point of inception? And so we designed the system to have real-time error checking. So over the years, we know all of the errors that happen. And we've taken all of those errors and we said, what can we put into the system that does that real-time error checking to help kind of guide the site or the person that's entering all of that information to get it right the first time? For example, I'll give you a really simple example, but it's germane to the conversation. So if I asked you what today's date was, you're immediately going to look to see your calendar and say, well, what date is it? Because you're not going to remember that off the top of your head. And those are the types of small things that we put in our application, that it brings up the calendar for you. It highlights today's date so that you can make the right choice at the right time and get it right, so that then error is not propagated through the rest of the system. So that's the real-time error checking that we built into it. And then I think last but not least we've allowed for flexibility in our system. So you cannot have a system that is so rigorous and so staunch that it doesn't allow you to flex on different kinds of studies. So there's a multitude, right, in the clinical trial industry, there's a multitude of different studies, disease states. There are some studies that go for, years upon years. There are some studies that only last for weeks or months. And so you have to be able to flex, and your system has to be able to deal with both of those simultaneously. And then as that system progressed past those original tenets, what we started to see is that we needed to add in functionality. And this is kind of key to where we are today. We continually invest in creating more functionality in the system. I would love to tell you that we sit here and come up with all of these great ideas on our own, but that's simply not true. These are all conversations that we're having with our clients, we're having with our sites. They're giving us feedback of, if it would do this, it'd be super helpful. And so we take all of that information. We have a huge parking lot of all of these types of upgrades to do. And so we constantly have a release schedule where we're always improving the system. So we don't get into this mindset of we've got a product, we release it, it's done. So we're really kind of taking that same mindset that you see out in the general, right, in Apple and iPhones and everybody else that's kind of doing that real-time development to make sure that your product is staying fresh and it's solving the most important problems that you're coming up against.
Indeed. And so what kind of data does Preclarus provide? So
Preclarus provides data around really all of the things that we've talked about up to this point as far as all the operational data. The first piece of data that we always have to provide is those results that we have for the investigator. So what the most paramount thing for us as a central lab is to get that sample in, have that testing completed, and report those results back out to the clinician so that they can make the right decisions for that patient. So that's the primary piece. The secondary to that, though, are really a lot of operational issues or things that we've been talking about. And so we want to make sure that we're surfacing query information. That information there's a dialog box that the site can have so that they can see the query that's come through. How do they answer that? There's also there's information for them to be able to look at kits and supplies. So again, it's a very retail-esque type of scenario where they're ordering the supplies. They want to see the tracking of those supplies. When am I going to get those? There's also study level documents that we're surfacing so that are required for the site to have from their manuals and all of those pieces. And then we also do a lot of data mining. That data mining is really about all of the operational issues that we're seeing and how do we surface that data back to not only the site to help them correct where they're making the issue, but also to the CRO that may be involved or the clients that are involved so that they can then have that information to put some sort of patch in there to say, okay, how can we help them from making that mistake? Or how do we educate them better so that they can prevent that?
And Chris, how can Preclarus help with study timelines? Because that's obviously a big thing to keep on top of timelines in any kind of a study. So does this tool help with that as well?
So there's a couple of things where Preclarus will help with study timelines. One is by design. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that Preclarus is a single global database. And if you think about that, the way that gets programmed, in the central lab industry, a lot of times there was multiple databases. There might be one in the US, there might be one in the EU, one in APAC. But if you have a single global database, then you only need to program that database one time. And then all of that information is propagated around the world. And so it decreases the amount of hours that it takes to actually program that and then release that globally. So that's one thing that it does. The other thing is because it's web-based. So we don't have a bunch of developers or data managers or people that have to be really well versed in some sort of IT language to program the system. It's all Windows driven. It's all web-based to where we train people to extract that information out of the protocol. There are multiple modules in Windows that they go in to take that information and place it into the system. And then it's done and ready to go. So you've got a completely different skill set where people can focus on the protocol and the information that's in the protocol and extracting that correctly, rather than having to be well versed in some sort of IT language that then, making sure that all happens. So that helps everything run from a study setup and getting that faster out the door. And then if you think about the other timelines, as you go through the clinical trial, so as the sample is collected, patient comes in the door, sample is collected, that sample is then shipped to a lab, maybe a central lab or some other lab, having that chain of custody go through. The thing that has to happen when all of those are going on is that real-time error checking. And if you can stop somebody from making a mistake, then that mistake does not get propagated downstream. And that's a huge benefit when it comes to the amount of time and effort that it takes to clean up a study. If you're doing ones or twos, that's fine. You'll be okay. But when you do something on scale, when you're talking hundreds or thousands of patients and hundreds and thousands of visits, one little error that's consistently made is then propagated to not only the central lab, but a lot of specialty labs or any place else that sample goes. Then all of that data has to be cleaned on the whole continuum. So the big focus has been, how do I prevent those errors from happening? How do we drive site behavior? How do we help the sites make the right decision at the right time and prevent all of those errors downstream, which then on any interim database lock or final database lock, your data's clean. You don't have to go have an entire team of people cleaning that data at the last minute.
And related to that point, what can Preclarus deliver in terms of database quality? Because as we know, it's an integral to maintain data quality, both at the collection point as well as maintaining that data in a database.
We decided to do some analysis on that because you really have to quantify that. What's the justification, right, of using a system for doing a lot of this? And so at some point you have to say, well, how do I make a comparison and quantify that data? So what we did over several years that we've been collecting millions and millions and millions of samples, we actually did within study analysis. And what that means is I'm comparing apples to apples, to where I've got a study, and maybe I have some users that are using the Preclarus system, and I'm having some users that are doing it the old way on paper. And how do we compare those two, the error rates that those two folks are having, right? And if your numbers are large enough, again, if you're talking about thousands of sites and millions of samples that are coming through, you really do get some statistical significance to make that direct comparison. So we did that across the board within all of our studies. And what we found was there's a 66% reduction in overall query rate just by using the Preclarus portal system. We also found that there was a decrease in lost samples. Now, one would go, how is a system going to actually decrease the number of lost samples? Well, you remember we talked about how the sites are actually accessioning these samples in. So once they get it, they establish that chain of custody. Now, they may not be required to ship that sample right away. Maybe that sample is going into one of their freezers and they're going to ship it later. Well, you can imagine sites are busy. They got a lot of stuff going on. They're putting samples in these freezers. How do they know what they have in the freezer? The system tracks that for them. So they're able to see, here's all the samples that I've put into the freezer. Here's all the ones that I have. Here's all the ones that I need to ship. And so when they go to ship those, they've got a running list of here's all the samples that I'm expected to have because I've said that I've collected those. And then I can make a shipment and I can go hunt for those samples to make sure I get them all and send them in. So you're actually decreasing the lost samples as well. Now, our clients, we had a client that just came to us recently and said, we believe in the product and we're going to use it exclusively on our studies. And unbeknownst to us, they came back to us and said, we did our own analysis to say how much better is it than doing it the old paper way. And their claim is 80% decrease. So we got 66, they got 80. I don't like to claim things that I haven't done the analysis on myself, but generally speaking, you're getting probably a 70 to 75% decrease in queries and for sure decreasing lost samples.
Excellent. I know you touched on this previously in terms of building this tool based on user feedback. And so, what kind of feedback have you received regarding overcoming challenges in the CentralLab through using a tool like Preclarus?
So it's been overwhelmingly positive. I will say that. I think that you have to put that into two buckets. So I think you have pre-COVID, and I think you have post-COVID. So pre-COVID, if I'm being completely honest, you had a lot of folks that were like, well, we kind of like the way that we're always doing it, and we're kind of married to the paper pieces that we're doing, and that's the way that people like to do it. So it was really tough, if I'm being honest with you, to try and move the needle to get people on it. Now, we did have some clients that wholly invested in it, and that was good. But post-COVID, so after all of the, the trials that happened during COVID, and everybody, look, not only just trials, but people working at home, working remotely, relying on things like Teams and all these types of technologies, you've seen a huge fundamental shift of all the people that are saying, well, of course I want to do this electronically. Why would I want to do anything on a paper anymore? And so the great thing is, I guess if there's a silver lining to COVID for us, one of the things is that it's really propagated the usage of the tool beyond our expectations. And sites love it because they don't have any paper, right? They're getting rid of all the paper that they've got to deal with, and they've got less queries. So there's a lot of time saved on their part.
Indeed, it's definitely a different digital world out there post-COVID. And so what do you see for the future of Preclarus, and what can we expect to see in terms of upcoming versions of it and its use in clinical trials?
One of the focal points, I think we mentioned it before, was we never stop developing. So we're always constantly in development, and we've got a large parking lot of things that we want to do based on users coming back to us and saying, either clients that are saying we need this additional functionality, or sites that are coming back to us to say, hey, this would be nice, these nice to haves. And so we're putting all of those things in place. The big focus that we have is that we want to become the central lab of choice for sites. So we want to give them the entire tool set that they need to help manage this clinical trial with relatively low, they don't have to think about it. They can just log in, I pick my patient, it tells me everything I need to do, I'm ready to go, and it saves me all this time. So I don't have to go digging through files and do all that. So that's a primary focus. And I would say we're about 90% there. I think there are some additional things that we're going to add into the system that will help them do that more effectively. But I also think that the industry is changing. So again, if you think about post-COVID, where we're at today, you're looking at a lot of people that are going, how do I get to patients at their home? So in some of these trials, you're going to want to be able to supply kits to the patient's home. They can do a self-collection. They can then pack that up, call for a courier, get that all back in, have the same chain of custody, all the same error checking, all of those things that we talked about, but just at a patient level, right, to be able to help facilitate the clinical trial. So I think those are the things that we're focused on in the future. But one of the last things that I think that I'll mention regarding that is also business to business communication. So you can't do this in a vacuum. And I think that's important, is that we're really putting a lot of time and effort in on how do we integrate. So we've got this great system. Now we need to integrate with our clients. We need to integrate with other labs. How do we expand that ecosystem that we've already developed to make it 3, 4, 10 times larger, right? We want to have a larger ecosystem, a larger footprint that is all encompassing. So it's a one-stop shop. And those are some of the things that we're doing.
Thank you very much, Chris, for speaking with us today in this Spotlight feature.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We look forward to learning more about the continuing developments and applications of PPD's CentralLab capabilities. Thank you all for joining us for this Xtalks Spotlight feature. We hope you enjoyed the discussion.